And I'm joined by Dan Tompkins of TesseracT. How you doing, Dan, mate?
Very well. We're kind of mid-tour at the minute, a little bit spaced out. It's hard work, but yeah, I'm here and I'm happy. So all good.
Well, good, mate. Sounds good, pal. Obviously, last September, you guys released your latest album, War of Being. Great reviews. It looks like the European dates have been going off killer, like we've just been sort of saying before it recalled there. But obviously, Sonder was 2018, 2019 was Sonder?
I have a feeling it was 2019,
Yeah, somewhere around there. I know it was like obviously
end
pre-pandemic.
of 2018, yes, I'm beginning 19.
Yeah. So, how did the sort of songwriting process change between Sonder and War of Being for you guys?
Quite dramatically, actually. We've always been a DIY band. The last time that we were in the studio prior to this album was the first one. Uh, one. Um, and Ever since then, we were just self-producing, DIY, wrote at home, shared ideas, online file sharing, that kind of thing. Um, we all got pretty self-sufficient at it. We've all got our own home studios, but we kind of felt like things needed to change. We felt like this new album needed to be a bit of a statement, and we needed to mix up the process a little bit. So we did actually go to the studio together for the first time in a long time
Oh,
with a
cool.
producer. A main producer. I had a vocal producer and engineer as well, and it was fantastic because we were all in the same place. It was a studio called Middle Farm Studios in Devon, and it's a huge complex, and we all had our own studio within the same complex. So we were all kind of like, doing our thing, meeting in the middle of the day, sharing ideas, and actually writing and rehearsing together. So it was a really nice experience. Yeah.
That sounds great, man. I mean, like you like you say, you've always been, you've always had your own stylistically. You've been a very progressive outfit. Each album seems to get bigger, kind of sonically, from a listener's point of view. To me, this album's absolutely no exception. The production is huge on this. It sounds really cinematic. Obviously, you brought out your VR game around the album release as well. How
Yeah.
did the sort of VR game come into play in terms of where did that kind of idea come from? Was his first sort of music VR game collaboration that I've certainly come across in that
Uh,
way.
yeah, I kind of, I'm a big gamer. I always have been. And ever since COVID came along, I began to do lots of live streaming, and my fan base and the Tesseract's fan base really supported me during that time, and they donated so much that I was able to build a super PC with the full setup. Everything. My whole studio changed ever since then, and I got into regular live streaming, singing and gaming, and that's around the time when I actually got into VR. And one of my moderators is actually a programmer,
Oh,
and we were talking for a long time about building a VR experience, and it began with building a replica of my home studio. I used to play VR chat quite a bit, and I would get the fans to join me in a world in VR, and I'd be singing live and just mucking around and dancing with them. And it was just a really it gave me the idea that actually there's a big gap and there's a market for music being more involved in gaming, especially VR. Like I couldn't find anyone that created a VR project that went alongside a new album or new
no, it's
music.
the first time I've come across it myself, which I thought was a really cool, thing that you guys did with it.
Yeah, right. And it's like with the metal world, a good portion of metal listeners are gamers,
Absolutely.
and especially with games like Doom and the crossover between music and gaming. It just feels like there needs to be more of that. And we're in a good place. We had a really nice concept, a nice story to it, with all these different characters that are involved in it. And I took it upon myself to develop a computer game. And slowly over time, I've managed to build a nice team and create a gaming development business now. So when we released the early access version of our game, it was actually to go alongside the second single for the campaign. So rather than going down the trad route of music video and then that's it, I thought, well, why don't we just release a song? in the form of a computer game. So that's exactly what we did, and it's that was it was you could class the early access version as essentially a demo of the game. Now we're actually working on the full version,
Oh,
which is going to hopefully come out sometime mid 25.
oh, nice. So that's something that's still very much in development in terms of a full aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very stripped back experience, very much leaning into walking simulator with a musical concept behind it with some puzzles and things. But now we're actually making it into a much more in-depth gaming experience. So
Wow,
very exciting. Yeah.
that's really cool, man. They say there's a big concept across the whole album and the VR game as well. Where did the concept itself come from? And for those who may not be aware of it, would you like to tell us a little bit about the concept itself?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it when we wrote the songs, there we didn't really have a concept in mind. It was only born later on when we all went into the studio. I put my stamp and my emotions into the songs and my ideas. And I think the thing that really works is that Tesseract are a band that write about the human experience. We write about the philosophy and um, the psychological impacts of existing. And so a lot of my experiences are based around that. And when we wrote the concept together, myself and Amos were in the studio, and we created, well, Amos initially created the seed of the idea, which grew into something much bigger. But it basically revolves around the idea that we're all at war with ourselves, and in terms of battling with ego for one, never really being our true selves and trying to discover what is it that's stopping us from doing that. So it is again based around existence, pretty much like Sonder was very much an outsider's perspective, looking in at other people's lives and realizing that everyone's living a very vivid and complex life just like our own, but sometimes we're so introverted in our own minds that we don't necessarily acknowledge that we're all playing a bigger part in each other's stories. And so rather than looking inwards outwards, we wanted to turn the camera on the self this time and analyze who we are essentially. And so that's pretty much a very stripped down version of what the concept might mean to some people.
Ah, cool, man. So did you said that some of the songs were already starting to get formed before the concept came along?
Mm.
They thought they influenced the concept, or was it just sort of musically that you had those songs before, and
No,
then
lyrically and musically, they were
lyrically
all.
you did have those pieces already
But
there?
we kind of reshaped them in the studio with the concept in mind. So we would have, when I was in the vocal studio, we'd have a big board, a pin board with images of all the characters and song titles and linking the themes together and then changing some of the lyrical content to match the story.
Mm.
That's the easiest way I can put it. Obviously, it was quite a complex process, but that's how it happened.
All right. That's really cool. So with that, I mean, with that in mind, I mean, for me, this album, I mean, I first saw you guys, Sonnet 2011, or was it 2010?
Oh wow, that was my first show. No, no, no. Sonosphere 2011.
Yeah.
Yes, that was my last show with Tesseract. I
Before you
left
left, yeah.
for an album. But I've just said I'm just celebrating my 10-year anniversary back with the band actually, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, it's all going really well.
Yeah, man. I mean, what were what we're talking about, actually. I saw you guys at Sunsphere 2011. That's the first time I came across you. As far as I was, it was a great set, really put me up. Been following the band ever since. But what were your reasons for leaving? And, equally, why do you think you guys have stayed so strong as you've come back in? You released a couple of records now since you've been back. This album in particular seems to have really expanded the sound. I mean, like I say, you constantly build on your sound and constantly exploring stuff. The VR thing kind of proves that you guys don't sort of sit in the more traditional terms one of it. You're looking to expand these horizons and everything else. But what makes you think it's working?
Yeah, we've been doing this for a long time.
Mm.
Individually, like I was beginning to, you know, explore my musicality in the 1990s, and so then we were all individually, branching out and meeting people and joining bands and gigging together until the turn of like 2008, that's when I first met Tesseract, and I actually supported them um, with my old band. I supported Tesseract,
Oh,
and then the following year, I was approached by the band and said, we're trying to do this. We're on the verge of getting a record deal, but we need a solid singer in the project. And so I joined at that point. But the problem is that I think when you are inexperienced and you're young and you sign your first record deal and you don't necessarily understand the legalities of it, I think that was a bit of a danger for us. We signed a good, I say a good deal. It was a good opportunity because it put us on the touring scene and gave us some element of support. But for example, after like the first US run that we did together, and we were all experiencing, being in a van and touring in hotels every night, all through North America and Canada for such a long time. And we did that twice. And then when you're coming back from a tour and you've got like a couple of $100 in your pocket, that ain't going to pay the mortgage. And so I was actually, I left a full-time career to join
okay.
and be a lifer to music. So I had quite a well-paid job, and I left that. And I've suddenly realized that I can't see an immediate future with this, and I'm struggling to pay my mortgage.
Yeah.
And so it was like the financial pressures of that really kind of like pushed me to a position where I had to do something different at that point. And I left to join a different project altogether, which at the time was looking very promising. And so I went away and did that. The guys then brought Ash in for an album.
Yeah.
That didn't work out with them and Ash. From a personality perspective, and then I was at a point 2 or 3 years on where I'd suddenly realized that I could actually make a living from music, and I began to become a vocal coach, and I studied vocal pedagogy and all that kind of stuff, and I started to teach. And so I was making a living from music in a different way while also still creating and releasing albums with bands like Sky Harbor and other projects. I was collaborating pretty heavy in the time that I wasn't in Tesseract, so I was still quite present.
Yeah, so
And
I remember the sort of various projects you were present, like you say, in the interview.
I was still there in the background and still in that scene. But it came to a point where Tesseract wasn't really working with Ash, and then they split with him, and they came back to me and said, look, are you in a different position now? How's life treating you? And I was like, you know what, I'm actually in a position now where I can do this, so let's rejoin and make it a thing. And we've never looked back. And I think it's those, I think when you experience those incredibly exciting moments in life where you'll start to realize your dream, and you have all these really difficult but beautiful experiences touring, I think that's what really stayed with us.
Yeah.
That brought us quite tight, and we've all, even when I left, we were still friends. We still existed. But yeah, it's just, we've never looked back, and we've always progressed and started to kind of like try and push the boundaries. But this new album, we all recognize that it's been 5 years since the last album, and we need to mix things up and change things up, because I've personally always wanted a vocal forward record, which has been quite balanced with the music, but I've always wanted to create an album which is like sonically huge.
Yeah.
And I feel like this time around we've kind of like nailed the sound. I know it sounds crazy because we've been together for so long, and if you listen to the back catalogue of Tesseract, like every album is sonically different in some way. It's not consistent, but I kind of feel like fans of Tesseract have kind of begun to understand that they're gonna get something different every time, but it's still gonna be at the core Tesseract. That being said, I feel like War of Being is a rejuvenation of the band in terms of like its energy internally and the band members, but also sonically. So hopefully moving forward, I think we'll expand on this, but ultimately we want to retain the bigness that we've created.
I mean, I think you're right there. I mean, I think with War Being this album, you say sonically, sound-wise, cinematically, it just sounds massive. When I was sent the first single of the release for the record, I was like, oh, brilliant new music from Tesseract, great. Chucked it on, and I happened to be in the studio, which is always the best time to hear new music, because sometimes I get sent stuff and I'll play it in the gym, and you've got skull candy earbuds on in the gym or whatever, and you never get a sound that you should. But I was literally just finishing off my radio show, and I was in the studio. I thought, oh, chuck it on. Obviously, knowing what you guys do with the progressive side of things, always sounds better on a better sound system. So chucked it on. I was like, they've got something special here. As soon as I heard the first track, it was like, there's something more here. And I don't know whether it's, like you say, you guys have 5 albums in now as a band. Obviously, this is the fifth TesseracT album. Yes, your music has, like any progressive act, any act that are pushing boundaries, you're going to get different stylistics and different sonics coming in. But it just feels like this one captured, although it's not a live sounding album, it captured that ambience, that atmosphere, that cinematic feel of when I've seen you guys live. It felt like that kind of energy was on this record more so than it has
Mm.
been necessarily on other releases. I don't know
I
if that.
think albums resonated with a lot of people. Like when we toured North America recently, at every show at some point I would ask the audience, raise a hand if this is your first time Tesseract show. And I'm not joking when I say 3/4 of the room are raising their hands. And it's been consistent every single show, even through Europe. And I don't necessarily understand why that's happened. We're still having some old school Tesseract fans turn up,
Hmm.
but we're having a big surge of new fans. And I think it's a combination of post-COVID and people wanting to get to live shows again, get out there. But I also feel like this album is naturally reaching a new audience, which is fantastic.
It does feel like a step up almost. Not that to just be disparaging of your other releases, because like I say, I've been listening to you guys for a considerable amount of time. But it really does feel like a step up sonically, sound wise, songwriting wise. Everything on this album seems to be hitting on all punches. For me as a listener, an album that tends to have a concept, sometimes you can get those tracks in it that in the concept of the album makes sense, but structurally on their own, they don't seem to stand out as much as certain other ones. What I loved
Yeah,
about The War of Being was every song, although, it is, you're talking about the bigger picture here with in terms of the concept, every song on this record has its place and every song and everything stands out on its own, which you don't always get with a concept album. So I think maybe that's something people might also be
yeah.
thinking.
No, I agree, and I think also the fact that we wanted when I say this, I'm not being pretentious in the least, but what I'm trying to say is that we wanted the album to be all killer, no filler.
Yeah.
Like no kind of like weird, slow ambient tracks that just kind of like don't really serve a purpose. Like every song hits hard. It's got a really emotive aspect to it, and it does link thematically, sonically as well. So there are like parts of songs that you have recurring themes, really sweet and rich um, synth and atmospheric guitars that kind of like link these themes between songs. And coupled with actually this being the first album which has a very upfront vocal
Mm.
presence, I feel like it's just a great combination. So I'm very excited to actually get back in the studio together and write the next chapter.
Do you think that's the processes that you followed with in terms of songwriting that you
Mm,
used was something that you would do again with the next record then?
100%, 100%, and especially from a vocal standpoint, I actually worked with a very amazing artist in her own right called Sestra. Her name's Kat Marsh, and she is a phenomenal vocalist. And it was her first time engineering a
Oh, okay.
singer, and so I actually met her about a year ago, and because I was unsure whether I actually needed and wanted to work with somebody. But actually, it was amazing because she was behind the desk. I was, for the first time in a long time, just freed up to express myself behind the mic. But it wasn't just that freedom. It was the to and fro between us, the constant communication and ideas that we were sharing, which were like changing lyrics. Um, she'd even just record harmonies as well together.
Okay.
'Cause we have very similar timbre and voices, which is quite surprising.
All
Being a
right.
female. um, so she actually does harmonies on certain parts of the songs, and she even contributed to some of the top lines as well, which is
Okay.
fantastic.
So she was really heavily involved in that process then.
Yeah, very much so. And I loved that. I loved actually sharing my experience with somebody else that understood it. It wasn't just having someone there just doing a job. She was totally invested in what we were creating together, which made the whole experience incredibly exciting. And so I'm already in talks with her, and I would like to work with her again. And it's the same with the band. Like we all want to get into the studio together and actually work with an overall producer, because having that perspective of somebody coming in saying, I'll give you an example. War of Being was actually 13 and a half minutes long.
Okay.
And he came in and said, these 2 minutes of the song, get rid of them. They're not serving the song. And so initially we were like, oh, wow, okay, that's a bit of a suggestion. And so there was a bit of to and fro, a bit of back and forth, and we tried it, and it helped. It really did help give it that perspective. And there were some decisions that were quite harsh, but ultimately aided the record. And if we wouldn't have worked with a producer, we wouldn't have done that.
Do you think that obviously, like you're saying, there obviously on the previous records, you've worked sort of in-house doing DIY records, because obviously you're in the thick of it. You're in, you're in the trenches, so to speak. You are in there making the music. It's very difficult to see the outside picture when you're concentrating on, well, I like playing this part, or I like singing this line, or I like
Yeah.
this sonically. Do you feel like having those people outside of it on this record helping
Yes.
you
Absolutely.
shape
Different
it?
perspective. That's exactly, it's all it is. Like you say, when you're doing it yourselves, you get so invested and entrenched in it all that you can kind of lose a bit of perspective. And it wasn't just about perspective. It was also about what Peter Miles and Cat Marsh were offering to us as well, in terms of their input and ideas. I mean, it wasn't just like someone sat there saying, don't do this, don't do that, or try this. It was a fully invested process, from like making sure we were recording in the right way, getting the right guitar tones, and just the constant flow of trying new ideas and mixing on the spot to see how it felt is priceless, I think.
Awesome, man. I mean, like you're saying, you're in the middle of a mammoth tour in supporting this release. At the moment, you've done, like you say, you're doing North America, you've done all the outside things, now doing mainland Europe. You're over to the UK, back to the UK in a couple of weeks, in fact, next week. So how have you found those songs translating in a live setting? How have you found that?
Incredible, like mind blowing. Everyone singing, all the crowd of like just going mad, raising their voices. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of moshing. We have a very diverse fan base that we can see from stage, from every spectrum of society. We've never had this before. When we first started, typically we would be playing to men in their mid-20s to early 30s, stood there, chin stroking, arms crossed, just looking at it and analysing it. Now there's a whole spectrum of people. There's people bringing partners, man and wife, young and old, different diverse people in the audience, and it's just incredible. But the set that we're doing is very energetic. And in the past, because we have predominantly been a progressive metal band, like our music is so diverse that it's been very hard to cherry pick a really energetic set. So you would have songs that were like up here, and the flow would dip, ebb and flow, right? But this time we've picked a set which is fully energetic, and it's translating very well, and we're enjoying it more as well. We're having a great time on stage.
Are there any songs in particular from your previous records that you are finding are working particularly well in that set? Obviously, the energy is really high on War of Being itself, but on from your back catalogue as such, are there any songs that you're feeling have almost got a different energy about them in this sort of setting?
Yeah, I mean, we're only playing like one song from Polaris, which is
Oh,
surprising, and one song from Altered State.
no.
There's one or two, or so one, two, three. There's actually four songs from Sonder, and also the rest of it is War of Being. So it's quite War of Being heavy.
Good.
Um, but we believe in those songs so much that we just wanted to do them live. If we had more time, or if we were really that way inclined, we would just do the whole album. And I think there'll come a point where we do a War of Being tour, hopefully in the future, just do the whole thing.
Nice.
So it's a hard thing to pick the songs that fans like against playing new songs that people might not know. But this album is already reaching such a big audience that people are singing the songs right out the gate. It's fantastic.
That's good to hear, man. For me, just as a music fan, there's nothing more disheartening in a way than when you hear an album from a band you loved and have loved for some time. You've seen them on tours previous, and you're loving a new record. You go see them live, and they play like 2 songs from the new record, and you're like, what's the point in creating new music if you're only going to do two or three? To
How
me,
we how
actually,
we've
four
been.
should be showcasing that album, and that sounds like exactly what you guys are doing. A
That's
show.
exactly what we used to do as well. I remember Sonder tour. We went out and we only played 2 songs from Sonder.
Yeah,
And I mean, some of the time it comes down to how much we
probably
can
hard to pick a set anyway. I mean,
know
especially
the song.
5 albums in, it's got to be tough.
Yeah, I mean, we had the beauty of time as well. So all this album was rehearsed
No,
before we recorded it. So we already knew the songs. So we're like, well, let's go, just go and do them live. You know,
that's awesome.
great.
Well, like you say, you are coming to the UK as of next week. I'll be down to London show, so I'm looking forward to that, man.
Yeah.
For anyone who hasn't seen the tour, other than like we just talked about there, in terms of being a very heavy war being set, what else can people expect from the shows?
I think we're at a point in our career where we're not just trying to play a gig, we're trying to deliver a show and an experience to people. So, and this is the perfect time and the perfect album to embrace a bit of theatre. So I'm adopting a character on stage,
Okay.
um, and I'm narrating certain parts and trying to build that special look. Um, Especially in the UK, we're going to be having some surprises
Nice.
that people are going to really be blown away by, and we're just leveling up, and we're all excited about it. You know, we've been doing it for so long; it just feels a shame to not lift the level of it all
Yeah.
and give it a big push.
Oh,
So,
that's good, man. So, what after this tour? What does the rest of the year hold out for you guys then?
we have 6 weeks at home, and then we're doing an Pan Asia tour,
Okay, yeah,
uh,
cool.
which is going to be great for a month. Hitting some new territories as well. So it'll be the first time in places like Taiwan, Hong Kong, Japan, um, and going back to India, back to Australia. And then we'll see what happens over the summer. We're not quite sure how many festivals we're going to hit, but because we're having quite a busy few years ahead, we
Yeah,
might just take a bit of time off at the end of this year, and then early 25 it'll be all go again.
nice.
So,
Sounds like full on, man. Well, Dan, thanks for your time, man. I appreciate it, especially when you're in the middle of the road, man. It's always it's good,
all
great
right,
stuff to do.
no
Um,
problem.
at the beginning of the interview, I'm going to play Tender, just because it's one of my favorite tracks off the album. But what song of War of Being would you like us to play at the end of the interview?
Um, I feel like because it didn't get enough of a push and it wasn't a single. I think give Burden a play. We have
Yeah.
a lot of people that like Burden, and they're a bit gutted that it's not in the live set as well.
All right, well, we'll lock that in. And Dan, thanks for your time, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, is it all right if I just do a little shout out about something as well? So
Absolutely.
just in regards to the computer game, we are in such a nice position, and to be one of the first, projects to create this VR game. I just want to encourage people, if you are a gamer, go out on Steam, go pick up the War of Being and support us ready for the full game. The early access is out there now to play, and we'd love for people to try it out. So
Good.
appreciate that.
No problem at all. All right, Dan. Well, thanks for your time again, buddy. Been good to chat to you, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks a lot, man. Take it easy.
You too, man. Take care.
Cheers, Eve. Bye.